Right, let's talk about the devil, and might as well start with a bang, as it were, when talking about the tarot cards. So I'm not going to go in gently and start with like the Fool or perhaps the Two of Cups or even something like the Four of Swords. Let's go right in and start talking about the devil, and there's a particular reason for this, which I'll get to later. So, the devil. Those of you who know tarot obviously have come across the devil in many guises, depending on the deck and depending on the interpretation. Of course, my interpretation of the devil is going to differ from other people's interpretations. I definitely don't put my interpretation forward as the truth or the whole truth, but definitely is my truth. And I think that this the way that I view the devil will definitely apply to various things that are happening inside us, things that we might be able to recognize about what's going on inside us and our processes, but also what's going on in the world. So we'll talk a little bit about that. But I would like to start with a phrase that came to me last week, which has really kicked off this talk. And this is the phrase that everything that we cannot and will not accept about the devil we will push out onto someone or something else. Let me say that again. Everything that we cannot or will not accept about the devil, we will push out onto someone or something else. Now, that brings up various things immediately, particularly the concept of projection. So I'm going to talk about that very quickly, and then we'll get to the card itself. So I work very much psychoanalytically in my work. And in fact, I'm going back to study psychoanalysis and analytical psychology, psychoanalysis being Freud, analytical psychology being Jung, who was a mentee of Freud's. And projection is really one of the mechanisms of self-defense that we have that I talk about often in my writing, whether for integrated tarot or for the sharpshootrix. But it's integral to the way that I work, but it's also integral, I think, to the way that we operate. And there are many belief systems that also talk about the idea of projection, if not always referring to it directly. So Plato's Cave and the philosophy of Plato's Cave is about projection. A Course in Miracles is about the nature of projection. And so essentially what projection is not seeing the world or somebody else for what it is that they are or the reality of it, but rather for seeing it for what we are. So anything that we are unable to own about ourselves, and when I say that, it implies a certain amount of awareness of owning that, so, or an awareness of a particular character trait in us that we're projecting, and that's not true. Projection is unconscious. So the thing that we are projecting out or pushing out onto someone or something else is actually essentially something that we are not aware of in ourselves. And because there is a defense mechanism inside us that is so good at what it does that it prevents that awareness from even surfacing before it gets thrown out onto that other object. So, and as soon as we see what it is that we're doing, then the projection no longer applies, and therefore it is known as withdrawing a projection. And I think one of the most valuable things that we can do in our life's work is to come to a place where we are willing and able to look for projections, identify them, and withdraw them, which is simply another way of saying owning our shit. So projection is it is everywhere. It's ubiquitous. As soon as you start to understand it and to know it for yourself, you see it everywhere. You see it in terms of the way that people interact, whether it's at a national level, international level, interpersonal level, relational level, intimate level, anything and everything where we are able to view ourselves as separate from another person is or another thing is ripe for projection, because you don't actually need to have a person in front of you to project. You can project things onto objects as well. But let's really talk about people or groups of people with projection. So projection is that way of not needing to own our shit, and by doing that we push our shit out onto someone else, and then we say that they're shit. So we go and denounce them for something that is all too often something that we are doing as well, but our own defense mechanism is as such so effective that that we think that it is entirely to do with them and nothing to do with us, when actually the reverse is true, which is incredibly humbling, that it is very rarely anything to do with them and entirely to do with us. So that idea of projection lies at the basis of what I was talking about with the devil, that anything that that we cannot own about the devil, we push out onto someone else. And let's draw an example from religion. Now, some of you might know my stance on religion. It changes all the time. I grew up a Catholic, a non-practicing Catholic. I am only starting to become aware of just how much that conditioning has stayed with me, even as somebody who didn't go to church regularly. But the notion of sin and the notion of not being able to be of not being good enough to get into heaven is very much, for me, tied up with the idea of projection. So in order to create a way that we can distance ourselves from those aspects of us that are less than appetizing, downright demonic at times, is that we create a figure that is the receptacle for everything that we don't want to own about ourselves. That figure is evil. And therefore we need to try as much as we can through all kinds of rituals and mechanisms and belief systems to distance ourselves as much as we can from that figure, who we have also created in a specially consigned space called hell. So it's as far away from us as can be. And we have locked that figure up in hell, and therefore anything and everything that we can do to remain separate from that, including all of the ongoing behaviors and rituals and mechanisms that we can employ in order to keep ourselves from hell's door, will prevent us from having to own our shit. So the devil is really a receptacle for me of everything that we cannot and will not acknowledge that is going on in each of us. From a religious point of view, I know that this is sacrilegious, that it is heretical, really, to suggest that that the devil is far closer to home than we would wish, and that actually, in order to be able to come to terms with the devil, we need to get a lot closer to the devil rather than to push him further away. So that's my thought on an idea of projection, where for instance, our fears around our sexuality, everything that is inadmissible to us about our sexuality, or our murderous thoughts gets really kind of consigned to this figure that then holds that for us. So the devil as an archetypal figure has a very, very heavy load to bear, with all of the millions and billions of people who go and put our stuff on them. So as an archetype, that's fine, but it's interesting for us to then work actively with an archetype. Even though an archetype doesn't have any feelings, it definitely picks up a sense of energy. So an archetype can be active, and it can have a lot of charge around it, particularly when there is so much being invested in it, particularly unconsciously. So to be able to then work consciously and with the willingness to be conscious, because we can't always work consciously. Projection, as I said, by its nature is unconscious. So we have to be aware that we are conscious of being unconscious when we work with an archetype like the devil. And then we can start to look at the devil in terms of the archetypal, of what it is archetypally, and then possibly to work with the devil, and then possibly with a view to taking back some of the things that we have assigned to the devil, in order to make our own responsibility much lighter. And I'll go on to why that's important, or why I feel that's important, because it may or may not be important to you, and that's really by the by. This talk is particularly really about my own point of view of psychological processes, particularly as they play out in the world of tarot, but not limited to that. So, the devil. Here is a version of the devil that I work with a lot. This is the devil from the Roerich Tarot, which is designed and created, is the child of Karl Roerich, who is a German artist. And and really, so the devil has a lot to carry in terms of archetypes, but also a lot to carry in terms of our expectations of what the card will look like. You know, what is this archetype that's carrying all of our unowned shit, particularly around all of the seven deadly sins. What is it that he will look like? And I like this particular devil simply because he looks particularly devilish, particularly with his horn-like eyebrows. But there's something about him as well that's quite mundane, and I like that because the idea of evil being something that reveals itself with horns and a trident is another way of keeping things safe. Because if something doesn't jump into your path that has horns and a trident, well, you go, oh well, then that's fine. You know, it's all fine, and there isn't a problem here, and there's nothing that I need to be looking at, and there's nothing I need to be working with. But actually, what Hannah Arendt referred to in her book about the Nazi era Germany and in the banality of evil is that evil is banal, and banal as being everyday and being part of each of us. And unless and until each of us can look at the devil in ourselves, then it will continue to perpetuate and proliferate in the world around us. So with tarot, the devil is that opportunity that we have to take a look at what it is that we haven't been seeing for now. And it comes in the 8 major arcana after a particularly active set of cards that really constellate around the idea of midlife crisis, though it can happen before midlife, it can happen after midlife, but it's the cards of why am I here? What am I doing? What's the meaning of all of this? You know, why is it that what I've been doing is feeling meaningless? And a great part of that is to search in the unconscious for what it is that has been holding us back, because we have been pretending to ourselves that we are something other than we are. That's the realm of the devil. Or that we are pretending to ourselves that that we are not, you know, what we are, or that we are what we dreaded. That's really what the devil is about. So the devil, as card number 15, comes after a process of, well, it starts really with, it starts at the beginning of the majors, but let's go with a few cards preceding that. We've got the Hermit, which is the first time that we really have that idea of introspection. That extroversion of, oh my goodness, isn't life wonderful? I can do anything that I want. Oh, and there you are, and aren't you amazing? And oh my goodness, look at feeling these energies moving through me. And then the Hermit really is that moment of going inside, taking everything that we've learned and starting to integrate that. And that's a period of seclusion and separation. It's a period of really having to come to terms with the fact that it is all down to us rather than up to anyone else. And then what happens is card number 9, the Hermit, we move then into card number 10, which is the Wheel of Fortune. So things in our outer world and our inner world shift. It takes us, that introspection takes us into a different kind of experience. And then according to the decks that I work with, then the next card is Justice. So after that shift, there's a rebalancing. Justice isn't about it isn't about what's fair in the laws of man. Justice is really about the rebalancing in the laws of nature, or the greater spiritual laws. So it is about reaping what you sow. It's about then that adjustment back into a rebalancing, so that things are back onto an even keel. We experience that to a certain extent in the chariot in a different way, and then Justice is coming back to that need for balancing, but that balancing is meted out to us on an archetypal level. So it comes at us from apparently from the external. So we have that time of justice, and then what happens after that adjustment is that we often feel like things have changed to the extent that we don't know what to do anymore. Things are not working the way that we want them to work anymore, and we have that moment of the hangman, which is that time of crucifixion, archetypal crucifixion, which is also the idea of archetypal suspension. Why me? Why is this happening to me? Why is it that I have to make these sacrifices in my life? That this isn't working. The old ways of doing things just don't apply anymore. So therefore, life grinds to a halt. That then shifts into death, which is a personal transformation. It is the shedding of our skin. It's something that really comes through us, having gone through this time of being in the cocoon, which is the hangman. We then emerge as a butterfly, and that's at that time when we really are the most vulnerable in terms of our. I don't know. I mean, when a butterfly comes out of a cocoon, it needs some time to be alone and away from interference, because it's still trying to find boundaries. And then so we shift then into card 14, which is Temperance, which is again a card of balancing, but this time, instead of trying to balance two things that may work well together, like the Chariot, the masculine and feminine principle, what we're trying to come to terms with is the idea of holding two things that don't go together. So it's the tension of opposites. And paradoxically, that is also the masculine and feminine, that we suddenly realize that in ourselves that there are two aspects that don't go together, as well as they also go together, but they also don't. They are perpetually in some kind of dance with of integration that never finishes. So one of the ways that we know that we are reaching midlife, or we are reaching a point where we are able to integrate, is that we do not need to solve this tension of opposites. When we're younger, there is so much of a need to solve that we can't handle the ambivalence. And whereas with when temperance happens, when we're in midlife, we are able to sit with the discomfort of our own ambivalence, not being able to unite these two things, and yet, strangely enough, in the holding them and accepting that they are not going to be united, it creates a third kind of motion, and that motion is some kind of inner motion that sets off this spiritual search that then takes us into card 15, where we are now finally ready, because we can work with ambivalence, we can work with opposites, we can work with discomfort, we can work with not knowing, all of those cards. We can work with transformation. So we're looking at the hangman, the death, temperance. We can work alone. And the hermit, we can work with change that comes at us from outside in the wheel. We can finally face the realm of the devil. And when we do that, we are essentially then confronting aspects of ourselves that are at the very seat of our fear, our self-loathing, our shame, our guilt, all of those lovely things that we will do anything and everything to avoid when we are younger, but life tends to bring us to a point, more often than not, where we meet the devil on our knees. And we do that because life has broken down to the extent that we understand that unless we have a look at what it is that's going on with the devil, that it is going to come to a point where we cannot move for having him all around us, and yet he is unacknowledged. Now, some people can go through their entire lives never having to meet the devil. There are some people who can go through their entire lives avoiding the devil, even though he's snapping at their heels. I'm definitely one of those people who wants to see the devil, even as I know that there's a part of me that really doesn't want to. But I'm curious enough to understand that unless and until I do look at what it is that the devil is holding for me particularly, that life is not going to work anymore. And this comes to the reason why the integration of the devil is so important, and it's really what I've been hinting at before, It's not simply about the fact that the devil perpetuates, this idea of the devil sitting in hell as far away as it can be, and holding all of our unacknowledged shit is perpetuated, because that's an archetypal idea of the devil. That's all well and good, but we are in the realm of the human. No, why I think the devil is so important for us to be able to at least be acknowledged as existing inside us and not out there is that if we don't do that, we start to we perpetuate what we can see is happening all over the world, which is that we other the other. We place what it is that we cannot see in ourselves onto someone else, and we make sure that it sticks as much as we can so that we don't need to ever have a look at it. And I often refer to this as the idea of a kind of psychological escape capsule. So in one of those sci-fi movies, I think of Alien particularly, which is a beautifully archetypal movie about the nature of evil and the bad mother, and the annihilating mother, and the good mother in Ripley. So you've got the alien as the bad mother, and then Ripley as the good mother. But one of the things in Alien that she tries to do is to jettison herself away from the site of trouble. So she tries to put herself in an escape pod and jettison away from the contaminated mothership. Or either that, or what can happen in sci-fi movies is that that the alien is then jettisoned away in an escape pod so that the mothership is then saved, and really what we find out after Alien is that didn't happen, and in Aliens in Aliens and then in Alien 3, what we thought we jettisoned then appears and comes back, and tenfold, thousandfold, and what Ripley had thought that she'd escaped, she has to go back to, and then what she thinks she's escaped again in Aliens, she has to go back to in Alien 3 because it was there all along. And so I like that as a good metaphor for what it is that we do with, we try and do with the devil. So what we do is we try and project it out onto the other, somebody else, something else, another race, another country, another culture, another person, our lover, our colleague, our siblings, our parents, particularly those who we are close to, our partners, our intimate partners, and other countries, as we'll see. We project it out onto them, and not only do we project it out onto them, but then we will try in some way to annihilate them. We either consign them to silence, we consign them to, we break up with them, or in the worst case scenarios, we will project the devil out onto another country and then go to war with them, because as long as we can make that projection stick out on somebody else and then we can kill them, then the devil gets to, the devil is destroyed, and we no longer have to look at what it is that's inside us, and all of the very things that we are accusing other people of being and doing. And so this is why it's so important to be able to be willing and able to even look at the devil, because the looking at the devil itself is hard. The willingness to be able to do it doesn't mean that you're going to be able to do it. The willingness is just simply the fact that you're about to say, okay, I'm rolling up my sleeves. I am going to start to get curious about what it is that I may not be seeing in myself that I'm putting out onto someone else. That's where it starts. That's not the end of the work. It's not suddenly like, oh my goodness, there I am, and this is me, and this is me, and we all live happily ever after. It is the work of a lifetime to be able to withdraw projections, because the very reason why we're projecting them is because they are the things they are the last things that we want to own about ourselves. They are the last things, they are so much the last things that we have created a special place, as I said, hell and the devil, for them just so far away that we don't even need to acknowledge them. And then we create a benign figure that stands in between us and them that will save us from ourselves. And so doing the work of having sympathy for the devil is really doing the work of having sympathy for ourselves. And ultimately, when we start to commit to that kind of work, we are not only committing to something that is a lifelong process, that is deeply uncomfortable, incredibly humbling, which is why most of us will not do it. But it is richly rewarding, and for several reasons. We'll go with the personal one first. Well, one of the personal reasons is that it takes a lot of energy to project and to repress something. A lot of psychic energy, that's in tarot is wands energy, that libidinal creative energy is primarily used to repress and keep into the unconscious what it is that we don't want to see, or to keep on somebody else what it is that we don't want to acknowledge. So that libidinal energy is used to keep the devil in hell, more or less. Now, when we start to withdraw those projections, which is lifelong work, which I suggest that you don't do alone, you choose whatever method it is that you use to work with the devil. I choose therapy. Some people use magic. It's whatever it is that works for you, but it needs to be contained, consistent, safe, and where you can do this work with somebody else, preferably, who is able to hold you through the process. But when you're able to start doing that and doing that work with the devil, and owning your projections and reclaiming your baggage, reclaiming your shit, what happens is that on a personal level, a lot of the energy that was used to keep all of those defense mechanisms in place is released and is able to be used in other pursuits. You will tend to find when you start working psychologically and energetically with the idea of the devil, whether you name it that or not, whether you call it therapy, whether you call it ceremonial magic, or whether you call it constellation therapy, or whatever it is that you're working with, you will find that after a particular time, and I say that after a particular time, it may not be immediately, and it probably won't be immediately, you will start to feel, if it's going well, more creative. You will start to feel more energy. You will start to feel a lifting of something that for some reason there is more of an ability to engage in life. And that is because, as I said, that energy is now being freed to devote to things that aren't about keeping things at bay, but rather at generating something, a creative energy. That creative, you become more creative. And that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to go out and paint, or you have to go out and write and compose a piece of music or write a book. It can be more creative in your own life. Your imagination may become more vibrant. Your relationships may become more alive, may become more engaged. You may be more attentive to detail in your life. You may be a more attentive partner. You may be somebody who's more willing to go there with people in terms of conversation, in terms of listening, in terms of being able to help somebody else face their own darkness, or to be able to not necessarily help them, but simply to be with them while they're going through what they're going through. So from a personal level, it not only frees up energy, but it also makes you a more whole person. Now, what Jung would have said about that is that doesn't necessarily make you a popular person. That doesn't necessarily make you somebody who is likable. But what it does is it makes you more you. And when you are more you, and you are more in integrity with yourself, and you're not using all of this energy to hold things at bay, you notice a phenomenal difference in your output and in your ability to embrace everything in life, including the very things and very people and very behaviors that you once thought were reprehensible and that you fought in others. You are much more accepting of others because you understand then that they too are going through the same things that you have gone through. And each one of us has our own particular cross to bear in terms of facing the devil in ourselves. whether we choose to do that or not. But on a larger level, not an intrapersonal level, but an interpersonal level, what a consistent commitment to looking at and being able to integrate what we find in the devil does is that it creates a whole lot more peace. We no longer need to invest our time and energy in not only othering the other through any kind of practice or anything, any belief system that we do, and often gathering followers around us or people who believe the same thing in order to bolster our sense of othering the others. So well, if we're feeling particularly, if there is a particular charge around something intrapsychically, what we will often do is that we will gather similar-minded people in a group, and then we have mob mentality that then goes out to other the other and goes out to fight what it is that's actually inside, but in another group of people. And in another group of people, either in terms of gangs, and when I talk about gangs, don't just limit it to the idea of the gangs that we see operating in various parts of the city or in various countries, but I'm talking about gangs within families, gangs at work, gangs among friends. The whole concept of gangs can be as loose as you want to make it, but it's where a group of people constellate around a particular identity, but also constellate around fighting another group or another individual. So that happens with gangs, but it also happens, and you will start to see it on an international level. So governments will go to war with other countries. Governments elected by us who carry our projections will go to war with other countries in order to annihilate a belief system that is a threat to ours. I am not saying, and I think there needs to be a massive caveat here, that there aren't things worth fighting for. That's not what I'm saying. I'm not saying that there are behaviors in other people that aren't worth pushing away or avoiding or walking away from. Not everything is projection. Some people are just assholes, and some things are just unconscionable, unthinkable, and need to be defended. The complexity of this work, when we work with the devil, is to be able to start to discern what it is that's ours and what it is that isn't. And that, again, is part of the work of the lifetime that we take up when we take up our work with this, is to start to identify in ourselves where it is that we can notice where something is legitimately something that we need to fight against, stand up for, walk away from, because it's not ours, or where it is that we need to look at it and integrate because it is ours. And a lot of that will have to do with our emotions, our affect around something. I'm not a doctor, I'm not a psychotherapist, I'm not an expert in this, but one of the ways that I've found that I know that there is something going on that is more than just something or somebody being an asshole is when I have a hooked in charge with something, an emotional charge that I can feel as if it's hooked into my belly, and also it won't let go. It's like there's a fish at the end of that, or somebody trying to hook me in, or I'm the fish and I'm flailing, and there is a lot of energy that's generated through this connection, this hook. And that's the only way that I can describe it. It feels like it's an alive thing that is feeding off itself. There is a certain amount of psychic energy that is generated just by the hook itself. Whereas when there is righteous, what I call righteous emotional response to something, it doesn't have that hook. It has more of a deep sense of profound unfairness at a situation, or a profound need to be able to address something that feels unjust. It's that idea of unfairness, but that's just simply me, and sometimes I'm wrong even with that. So this is tricky work, which is why I suggest that when you do this, or if you decide to do this, that you work with somebody else, and you work with somebody else who is trained in doing this. But really, the devil carries a lot for us, and it is important work, not just on a personal level, but on an interpersonal level, but also on an international level. And I hope that this has given you some food for thought. I would not want you to go out and then start calling projection at anything and everything that's going on. That's not really the point. It's really rather more about sparking curiosity about internal processes that then have their manifestations outside. And also just it's seldom useful to be able to call projection or to cry projection out on somebody if you see that happening with somebody else doing that to something else, because by the very nature of the fact that it's unconscious is that they're not going to be able to notice that, and in fact you'll probably cause more trouble because you are then simply piling confrontation on a confrontation that's being defended against. But in terms of your own work, this is really where the emphasis is to own your own stuff. So it's not about asking somebody else to own theirs. They can do that when they can. They'll do that if they want to. It's none of our business. It can be incredibly frustrating to see it active and happening. I find it particularly frustrating to see it on an international level. There is nothing I can do about that, as urgent as it might be. But what I can do, and what I do is commit to working on myself, and that's as good as any place to start, because if we don't start here, and we don't start with each and every one of us, if we don't start ourselves, we don't get anywhere, and then nothing happens. It doesn't move upwards. It doesn't shift outwards. There are no ripples outwards. It doesn't impact our personal relationships, which then impact the other relationships, which impact our communities, which then impact our countries, which impact the world. Can you see how it ripples out? It ripples out with one person, which may not feel enough in the environment that we're working with, but it is what we have, and it's the best place to start. I hope this is coherent enough. It was completely unscripted. I decided to sit down and talk about it now. If you have any questions, please ask. If there's anything that didn't make sense, I'm sure there was, then please get in touch. I would love to hear your thoughts. Otherwise, I am going to upload this with my wishes that whatever it is that confronts you today, whether it's in yourself or whether it is in someone else, that it gives you just one moment where you can have some curiosity. That's it. Curiosity, that's all that's needed. And that's a start. It's the start of everything. I wish for you curiosity. Thank you.